on the Paul McGuire Report, we know that man is not basically good. All you have to do is look at human history, and you can recognize very plainly that man is not basically good. Look at human history: bloodshed, rape, wars, annihilations, mass starvations, mass slaughters, greed, dictators, not to mention all the horrific things individuals do. So mankind's history essentially establishes the fact that man is not basically good. That doesn't mean that men and women can't do some incredibly noble, good, spectacular, and wondrous things. They can. Men and women throughout the centuries, since the beginning of time, have done things of incredible virtue, incredible beauty, incredible self-sacrifice. So it's not just a simplistic statement that man is basically evil. The reality is that all of us are made in the image of God. And because we are creatures made in the image of God, we are capable of doing incredibly loving, kind, compassionate, good things, just as God does. Now, those people who do not believe in God, they believe, ironically, that man is basically good, not that man is basically evil. So they don't believe in the fall of man. They don't believe in the fallen nature of mankind. That's a Judeo-Christian thought. But the problem with that is there's no historical proof to support this idea that man is basically good. And furthermore, they operate under the premise that it's the environment around us, the environment, the culture, the educational system, the people, the values or lack of values of the people, the economics that shapes the human personality for good or evil. So in their way of thinking, it's not about fixing the heart of man or the spiritual heart of man. It's about fixing the materialistic, physical, economic environment that a person lives in. And they believe that if you fix the environment, if you artificially create through government programs and massive big government and social workers and psychiatrists and so on and so forth and education, that you can change the environment, and if you properly change the environment, then man will cease to be evil. Now, the problem with that thinking, and that's how a lot of people, it's those ideas, by the way, that are one of the primary reasons why people vote the way they do, because they believe in these concepts. But the problem is that history, again, shows us quite clearly that, yes, the environment, the social environment, the economic environment, to some degree, may play a role in how a person's character is formed. Absolutely. But that's not the determining factor, and it's not the sole determining factor. Let me give you a case in point regarding society as a whole in America. You know, we see a bombardment of anti-gun, anti-NRA television commercials and celebrities, you know, screaming for gun control. And they're so hypocritical because these superstar celebrities, you know, rock musicians, hip-hop musicians, country musicians, Academy Award-winning actresses and actors and directors, television personalities, they are all hollering and using their platform for gun control because they believe that if you take guns away from the people, that people won't kill people, which is really a rather immature thought because it's childlike, it's not developed. But further than that, it's a completely hypocritical stance that these people take. It's complete hypocrisy, because anybody who's anybody in Hollywood, the entertainment industry, the music industry, politics, economics, so on and so forth, all of these people, the ones crying out for gun control, without exception, they have the most high-powered guns. They have military-grade weapons and guns. And they have private armies. Maybe it's 3, maybe it's 6. Depends how big you are as a superstar. But these people have private armies. We're not talking about your run-of-the-mill security guard. We're talking about they hire these very expensive upper echelon former Navy SEALs, former special ops, highly trained men and women who are experts and who are heavily armed to protect them. So on one hand, they want to take the guns away from the middle class and the working class, so you can't protect yourself if a maniac comes into your school, or if a maniac breaks through the door of your house or on the street. You are completely without protection. Why? Because the police won't show up soon enough to save your life. You'll be dead by the time the police show up. I mean, how naive could you possibly be? How stupid could you possibly be? I don't know about how it is in the rest of the country, but if you call 911 in Los Angeles expecting a quick police response, good luck. You know what a 911 operator told me a number of years ago? We were living up in the Hollywood Hills in Lookout Mountain, and we heard these gunshots going off, and then repeated gunshots going off, and more gunshots going off. Now, the Hollywood Hills, as many of you know, is a place where a lot of rock and roll stars live, superstars like Madonna, and then artists and actors. So it's a combination of people who are on the top of the mountain to people who are trying to make their way up the mountain in things like the entertainment industry. So given that mixed environment, there has always been a significant amount of crime due to the heavy partying and the drug usage by the people in the entertainment and music industry that live there. During the 70s, just about anybody who was anybody in rock and roll was living up in Laurel Canyon. So I called 911 and said, I hear a lot of gunshots going off. I've heard that there are drug dealers up the hill from where we live. Could you please send a policeman or a policeman there before somebody gets killed? Because there was like 8 gunshots going off in a strange rapid-fire type shooting. And this was the answer of the 911 operator. She said, I'm sorry, we can't. No, she asked me, has anybody been killed? That's how she began her answer. Has anybody been killed? And I said, no, I don't think anybody's been killed yet. She said, well, we can't send somebody out until somebody, has been killed, until it reaches a certain escalation of seriousness. And I said, well, what good is it to call 911 if you won't come out until somebody's dead? And then it's too late. So I was annoyed, obviously, so I just hung up the phone. This was about 20 years ago. And all of a sudden, out of the blue, she calls me back, the 911 operator. Now, this is before we all knew about mass surveillance and stuff. I should have known better, but it didn't occur to me that, when I called her to get the cops to help us, that my phone number was printed up on her screen. And she gave me a chewing out, and I really didn't want to get involved in an argument with the 911 people. So I let her vent, and that was it. But, the police are not coming if you call, for the most part. Maybe you'll luck out and a policeman will be, near your house, but you can't count on that. So the middle class, the working class, hardworking people, they want to take the guns away from hardworking, honest, tax-paying, decent people. Think of all the single mothers, just for example, who don't have a husband, and because they don't have a husband, for whatever reason, they're economically stressed. They have a tight budget. So they have to move. Many of them live in marginal neighborhoods where there's gang activity and stuff. And these gangsters and criminal types, they're always checking everything out. And they notice when a single woman repeatedly takes her kids from school back to her house, because in their minds, single woman alone is a potential target. Okay, they're watching. Or if there's an elderly person in the house who can't defend themselves, or an elderly couple, or even a husband and wife in a family, in their 30s or whatever, they can be a potential target if the gangs and the criminals don't sense that these people have a means to defend themselves. Okay, so what happens is these people are targeted, pre-selected for a home invasion. That's when the gangs smash down your front door, whip out guns, and I won't go into the details of what they do to people. It's your worst nightmare come to life. It's not just robbery. Oh, and it's not just rape. There's a lot of other stuff that gets worse and worse and worse. You better not have young children in the house, and all kinds of things. I think you can read between the lines, right? So they have no means of defending themselves. And so when a person has a gun who's a responsible citizen, that gun can potentially save the life of that single mother with children, with the elderly couple, or an elderly mother, or an elderly father, or just a regular married couple in their 30s or 40s who a gang may deem to be a target because they think they have money or something in a middle class or even lower class neighborhood. They are targets. So if there's a home invasion, a burglary, somebody breaks into your house, the gangs are heavily, heavily armed, okay? Because this very common sense understanding the criminals get. Criminals are criminals, as most of you know, because they don't abide by the law. They break the law. So if a criminal wants a gun, most criminals do want guns. The concept that a gun is illegal for you to buy, or the concept that guns have been outlawed or it's illegal to own a gun, I mean, just use your common sense mentality. Forget if you're a conservative, forget if you're a liberal. Just imagine for a moment that you have common sense. Now, I'm not putting down the regular listeners and viewers of this program, but just imagine for a moment if you just had common sense. Will a criminal or a gang member hesitate for 2 seconds? For 2 seconds. To buy a gun or to get a gun because it's illegal? No. They don't care if it's illegal. That means nothing to them. They're going to buy it anyway because they're criminals. Criminals break laws, therefore they're going to break a law to buy high-powered guns and tons of bullets. End of story. That's what criminals do. They're feeling guilty or worried about the fact that it's illegal is a non-issue. The only people that worry about breaking the law and buying a gun when it's outlawed are honest people who are not criminals, they're not thieves, and they would only use a gun in the worst of circumstances when self-defense is required. Those are the people that obey the law and wouldn't break the law to acquire a gun. So whenever you make guns illegal, what you have is all the decent, honest, hard-working people have no guns and no means of protecting themselves. And all the criminals and all the gang members are heavily armed because they don't care about breaking the law. And then the next step is, and here's where the light bulb should really go on in your brain, when the criminals know that the dumb politicians with the dumb followers who voted them in, when the criminals know that the people in all these houses in the neighborhoods that they go into, when they know that nobody has guns because guns have been made illegal, guess what? The crime, murder, and death rate skyrockets because now criminals are not nervous about breaking through the front door or breaking through the back door. They're not nervous because they know that the majority of the people do not have a gun to protect themselves. So they know, so they're emboldened. They have a lot of confidence. They don't have any fear because they'll break in. Hey, no big deal. They're not armed. And if you come at somebody with a kitchen knife that's got an automatic weapon, the gang member, it's no contest. He'll drill you down in a rapid-fire succession of bullets. So that you understand how obviously common sense this is. Now, these big-time politicians who shoot their mouths off about gun control and these Hollywood celebrities who love to pontificate and tell everybody else what to do. Let's go back to this. They have private armies. They can afford to buy the highest security in terms of gates, walls, tall gates, with electronic sensors and 25 video cameras for surveillance and laser beams and all kinds of electronic surveillance equipment that keeps criminals away and records and set off alarms if criminals break into their property. These wealthier people not only have that, but they hire high-level security forces of men or women that were former Marines, former Special Ops, former Navy SEALs, people who are heavy duty, and these people they hire are armed to the teeth with automatic weapons and the most sophisticated weaponry, and they're trained to use it. So these celebrities and politicians walk around, they have no fear because they have a little army to protect them that are armed with guns. And then the rage in California and Manhattan and other places is that people who are very affluent and wealthy in the entertainment business and the music business and the political world and with CEOs, they have what's called a panic room in their mansions. And many of you know what a panic room is because you've seen it in the movies. The panic room is this room where if the house has been broken into by criminals or a home invasion, the people who live in the house, the affluent people, can press buttons which automatic iron gates go down. The windows are closed automatically with iron bars. The entire exterior of the house is automatically walled off. And then the people in the mansion, the wealthy people, retreat to a room in which they can live for a long period of time, stocked with food, entertainment, but it has, super thick walls of solid steel. It has its own private oxygen system and electronic communication system. And basically, they can fend off criminals in a panic room, for a long period of time, because a panic room is like a bank vault with super thick, bulletproof plexiglass windows, and it has all kinds of guns and ammunition in there. So, they're not worried about the bad guys, the drug crazies, and the gang members. See how hypocritical that is? Do you see how selfish that is? Think about how selfish that is to pass legislation that deprives single mothers, elderly people, and regular people from defending themselves, while the wealthy and the famous can hire private armies, and their little private armies are armed to the teeth, and they have all this surveillance equipment and bulletproof limousines and the whole deal. I mean, it's so hypocritical. But you know why people vote for people like that? Because they're dumbed down. The people who vote for people like that are living in kind of a hallucinatory consciousness, like strawberry fields forever. They're like floating around, man, and their brain is not connected to reality. It's extremely selfish, and only a fool would elect a politician who would take away the guns, because, you see, you have to be pretty stupid. I mean, really stupid. I'm just being direct with you and frank. I'm not going to beat around the bush. You have to be a classical moron. Yeah, a classical moron to buy the idea that if you make guns illegal, then the criminals won't have guns. That just isn't true. Okay, so that comes from a worldview. That there is no God and an environment makes people bad. And in this worldview, the people who subscribe to this humanist worldview believe that if they spend enough money in ghettos and in crime-ridden neighborhoods with gangsters and stuff, that if they pour enough money in it, that they'll change people's hearts, and people won't have an incentive to be criminal, to rape, kill, murder, shoot to death, and stuff like that. They believe that by changing the external environment, then people won't want to kill, murder, shoot, rape, massacre, torture each other. But reality tells us that's not true. They've changed plenty of environments. They've spent countless millions in ghetto neighborhoods packed with gangsters and criminals and stuff, and they made it beautiful with parks and opportunities and everything else. And guess what? The gangsters and the criminals continued to be gangsters and criminals. And then back to gun control. Think about this. See, they never tell you this in the media. They never tell you this in the school system, because they're brainwashing you. And they especially brainwash young people. They don't want you to know the truth about what history says. 30 years ago, 35 years ago, 40 years ago, people had guns all over the United States. Okay? Many states still have, people are carrying guns, either openly or concealed weapons in many, many states in the United States. And guess what? The crime rate is so low because the criminals are not going to attack a citizen that they know is armed and can fight back. They're not going to go try to rape a single mother or a teenage girl because they may have a weapon, either concealed or not concealed. But where guns are legal, the criminals are afraid to break in, steal, rob, kill, destroy, rape innocent people. So the fact that the citizens have guns doesn't increase crime, it decreases crime. Now, also, when you go back, let's say, 60 years ago, in the United States, people had guns all over the country. All the veterans who fought in World War II, that was a huge number of men, massive number of men. Veterans who had fought in World War I, veterans that fought in the Korean War and the Vietnam War, they all had guns. They had military training, and they all had guns, whether they lived in apartments or houses. They had guns to protect their families. And they didn't shoot innocent people or act crazy. Okay? And guess what? There were more guns spread around more people. The majority of American families had guns in their houses. When you went to rural areas, people on farms in rural areas had hunting rifles, guns of all kinds, ammunition of all kinds. They would teach kids to shoot at, 7 years old, 8 years old. And guns were everywhere. But notice when you examine the time when guns were everywhere and young children or preteens and teens were being trained to use guns, notice that there were 0 school shootings, 0 shooters hiding in hotels firing into a country music concert. There were 0 Columbines, 0 Sandy Hooks, 0, these strange shooters that keep happening in a cycle every 3 or 4 weeks to a lesser or greater degree. There were no people walking into churches and blowing people away. There were no people walking on the streets and blowing people away. These mass shooters did not exist. And yet, there were more guns available to more people back then than now. And then if you go back even further in time, let's say about 100 years ago in America, in the farms and rural communities, they didn't quite have suburbs, but in rural areas, everybody had guns for hunting, for protection, and guess what? No mass shooters, no crazies whatsoever, none of these lone wolf assassins. Why? Well, why? Because it wasn't in the minds of the people and in the hearts of the people. There was a Judeo-Christian belief system. People still went to church back then, 100 years ago. And even if they weren't born again, they feared God to one degree or another. The 10 Commandments they were taught, the laws of God, Jesus Christ, heaven and hell, they were preached to the Bible, okay? So there was, to whatever degree, the fear of God, a respect for the laws of God and the respect for the laws of the land. And what does that tell you? It tells you that it wasn't people having guns and owning guns and access to guns, including young adults and preteens. It wasn't the proliferation of guns that causes the mass shootings and causes the, crazy events we keep seeing on TV, like Columbine, and all these school shootings and these endless shootings of innocent people. It was non-existent, once again, 0. You could go through a 50-year period or more. 0 crazy mass shooters. Why? Because the issue is not whether or not people have access to guns or whether or not people own guns, know how to use them, etc., and that guns were in every household. That is not what causes the mass shooters and the crazy shooters and the mass shootings and killings. That's not what causes it because of the ownership of guns all over the United States, access to guns by teenagers and everything else. If it was the citizens owning a lot of guns, which was the cause of mass shooting, then 100 years ago we should have had a phenomenally higher rate of mass shootings. But we didn't. We had 0 mass shootings. So it should be obvious to anyone whose brains still work and the batteries are still good in your brain, it should be obvious to anyone who can think. That would exclude Marxist college professors. That would exclude politicians, who have a hidden agenda. That would exclude Hollywood celebrities and mainstream media. That would exclude a lot of people, the assumption that your brain still works. Because the history of the United States proves that it was never guns and gun ownership by citizens which caused the mass shooting and the mass shooters and the crazies. What caused that is the breakdown of the American family, the rejection of Judeo-Christian culture, rejection of the Ten Commandments, rejection of an absolute right and an absolute wrong, rejection of going to church, a rejection of absolute right, absolute wrong. Those and the quantum increase in, and this, I'm not saying that everybody who uses legal medication or psychiatric drugs is going to go out and be a mass shooter. That would be very dishonest. But there is a disturbingly small but significant percentage of these mass shooters who are on a cocktail of psychiatric drugs. And there's a psychiatric syndrome regarding drugs that increase the serotonin for depression and related neurological mechanisms, that if they forget to take their drugs, or they just stop taking them immediately, or if they play around with the schedule and their drugs are not monitored properly, they can go like crazy. So what's the cause of mass shooting? What's the cause of crazies firing away at people is not access to guns. What it is we have an increase of highly emotionally disturbed individuals in America. You see, there's been a quantum increase in psychologically broken, psychologically damaged, psychologically brutalized people who have been abused, come from no healthy family structure. And these people, because they're so psychologically wounded and have so much psychotic and crazy anger suppressed in them, go ballistic. And that is what's causing the mass shooting. Notice that almost without exception, the mass shooters are always loners. Because loners are kind of like outcasts. They don't have friends. They stay all by themselves and they develop weird ideas. Loners, many times these shooters are on a cocktail of legal prescription drugs. And then you have the destruction of the family. They didn't have a loving mother. They didn't have a loving father. The school system then, to compound and amplify creating a potential Frankenstein shooter, you then, on top of it, have the mainstream media and the mainstream media and the educational system indoctrinating children, brainwashing children, and teaching them that there is no God, there is no absolute right, there is no absolute wrong. Whatever feels good, do it. There is no God. There is no law of gods. There is no judgment by God. And then you brainwash the children into believing your life has absolutely no meaning. You came here by random chance evolution, from a bunch of molecules to simple little organisms to, little forest creatures to turtles and dinosaurs and ape men, and then finally over 500 million years, human beings accidentally through random chance show up on planet Earth. Now, listen to the major foundational belief that is embedded in the theory of evolution. And then you can do the math about how it applies to the increase of mass shooters. One of the major teachings within Darwinian evolution is this expression: only the fittest will survive. Another statement in our Darwinian evolution is might makes right. So the whole theory of evolution is based on the fact that any species will evolve into a completely different and a higher level species through its superior intelligence, superior strength and power and might. So those apes, those microorganisms, those animals and lizards and stuff that are stronger and smarter and healthier than the others, they will destroy the others and they will be the predominant species. Now, remember, there's no scientific evidence whatsoever that proves that one species has ever evolved into a completely different superior species. So that's a mythology. But this idea that might makes right and only the fittest survive basically is teaching our children and society that brute force, cunning intelligence, if you exercise your power, if you defeat the people around you, there is no God, so you can do it by any means necessary, that will enable you to evolve and to triumph and to become a ruler. See, no Christian values, just animalistic values. So when you teach millions and millions of people that there is no God, there's no right or wrong, there's no heaven and hell, there's no judgment, that whatever feels good, do it, you're telling millions and millions of people that you have every right to use your brute force, brute strength, with guns, atomic bombs, knives, whatever it takes. You have every right under evolution to do whatever you want, as long as you have the power to get away with it. And don't think that the clarity of evolution doesn't manifest in the brains of young people and people all over the world. It does. Now, humanists try to soften this up. They can't. They have a dilemma, because on one hand, they like to think of themselves as virtuous and so on and so forth, and they like to think of themselves as kind, loving, decent, compassionate people. So they have a problem, because their own theory of evolution basically says mankind lives in a jungle of a society, and the more powerful, fiercest, cruel animals, species, and men and women will triumph over the weak. Listen to the ideas have consequences. So listen to the consequences of that belief system. First of all, that's exactly what Adolf Hitler believed in Nazi Germany. Okay, with genetic engineering. He believed in the concept of a master race or a superior race. What Hitler and the Nazis believed was that evolution has produced the fittest, most powerful, intelligent human species. And they called the Aryan and the Nazis and the occult societies that they belonged to taught that the Aryans, the blonde-haired, blue-eyed, pale-skinned Aryans in the Scandinavian countries, etc., that the Vikings, these people were genetically members of a superior race known as the master race, that they were genetically superior to weaker human beings. Now, because Hitler took this concept of might makes right very seriously, he simply acted out what all the liberals were secretly believing. He just put it into action. So what he did was he created the Nazi Party, he established Nazi Germany, and one of the first things he did is he gathered the mentally ill off the streets, people with diseases off the streets. Hitler gathered homosexuals off the streets. And then he gathered millions of Jews and Protestants off the streets. And he considered all these people mentally defective and a part of a weaker species. So he believed that he had to purify the DNA, and therefore he slaughtered 7 to 8 million people in the concentration camps. That was his program for creating a master race. And you say, well, that's eerie and scary. But that's the belief system that's taught in the school systems. It's just that they don't spell out the consequences to evolution. Anybody who understands evolution knows that what Hitler did is exactly the consequences that come from the idea of evolution. Okay? So it shouldn't shock you if you're thinking rationally. Now, another thing that's very important to understand is that the elite in our world that secretly run our world believe that might makes right. They believe in Darwinian evolution. They don't believe in God. And those who are the wealthiest, the international banking families, the most intelligent and the most power, they don't believe in Jesus and God. They believe that due to their power, their intelligence, their wealth, their DNA, their genetics, that they are superior to the rest of the human beings, the globalist elite. And therefore, because of their wealth, intelligence, and power, and genetics, that they have the right to rule over the inferior masses all across the world. And that's where these ideas of a scientific dictatorship come about. Because what Huxley was writing about in his book, Brave New World, it was a futuristic scientific dictatorship where people were genetically bred and their DNA was transformed to create like a dumbed-down slave race for physical manual labor, and then like a kind of like middle-class worker race. They were bred genetically at a certain level. And then kind of like a manager class, they were bred at a certain level genetically. And then you had your intelligent class and your super ruler class. But all of this was contingent upon the modification of their DNA. So classes of people were created with like a ceiling on how much their intelligence could develop. And if you were genetically breeded to be a slave, your genetic brain power wouldn't ever allow you to go beyond that. You were locked in by your DNA to be stupid, and the people who were at the top had DNA that was superior, so their intelligence could handle great information, and they became powerful rulers. That was not just a fictional book by Huxley, Brave New World. That he was laying out the game plan of the elite. That's why Rockefeller, one of the prime members of the elite who worked with Rothschild, that's why Rockefeller, he developed laboratories in the 1920s, eugenics laboratories. And now the science of eugenics is just a fancy word for selective breeding. Just like the elite love to breed prize racehorses. So the Rockefeller program of eugenics, they had special laboratories, and what they would do is sterilize men and women with inferior DNA. they would do anything to stop them from reproducing. Rockefeller worked closely with the founder of Planned Parenthood at that time, Margaret Sanger. And during this time period, starting in the 1920s, the vast majority of abortion clinics, and Margaret Sanger established Planned Parenthood, the vast majority of abortion clinics were placed in minority neighborhoods such as the African American community, Hispanic community. They had percentage-wise overwhelmingly the largest amount of abortion clinics because the goal was to abort just about every Hispanic African American baby they could. That way they would be breeding out genetically what they considered the undesirables, and then they did everything they could at that time to cause the white people to be able to procreate and produce a massive number of certain types of white people who they considered to be the master race. Now Hitler, he took that science and technology, he got it from Rockefeller, and he just implemented it in Nazi Germany. And that's what a huge part of Nazi Germany was all about. It was a DNA genetic dictatorship. And that was the real reason for the concentration camps in the Holocaust. Because Hitler hated the Jews. He considered them an inferior race. He hated huge numbers of Christians and others, and he slaughtered them all through gas chambers and ovens in the Holocaust, 8 million in total. And the goal was to annihilate people with defective DNA and genetics. And then he created all these programs like the Lettersborn program to stimulate and increase the amount of master race white people to give birth to babies. Now, this is still going on, by the way, via vaccinations and other stealth techniques. But the elite also have another core belief, and you need to educate yourself as to what these beliefs are. The globalist elite, like Rockefeller, Rothschild, and all the others, they believe that the number one source of mankind's problems, that all of mankind's problems are due to excessive population growth. And so excessive population growth is the thing causing all the problems on planet Earth, from war, starvation, lack of resources, overcrowding, etc., etc. This belief system was created by a British clergyman in the 1800s named Malthus. And instead of preaching the gospel or the Bible, Malthus preached and wrote books about his theory and doctrine, which came to be known as Malthusian philosophy, which all the elite even today embrace secretly. And in Malthusian philosophy, Malthus taught that all of mankind's problems across the world are due to too many people being on planet Earth. So excessive population growth is the number one problem behind all problems. And Malthus said overcrowding, crime, disease, climate change, wars, rapes, food shortages, chaos, everything is due to too many people on planet Earth. And planet Earth was only designed to hold a much smaller percentage of people than are alive now. So the globalist elite in the last number of decades secretly created what is known as the Georgia Guidestones, where they list their plans for planet Earth. And it says right on the Georgia Guidestones, carved into the stone, it says, one of the primary goals of the globalist elite is to reduce the population of planet Earth from like 7 billion, 7.5 billion, down to 3 billion or a billion as fast as possible. As fast as possible. So let's say if you're starting with a population of 7.5 billion, and the globalist elite, the wealthiest, most powerful people in the world, are totally committed to reducing the Earth's population, let's say from 7 billion to, let's just say, 3 billion. Let's be conservative. That's a reduction of like 4.5 billion. How do you get rid of 4.5 billion? And they say it has to be done as fast as possible. Well, you can't use ordinary means to reduce the population. You have to use radical and drastic means to kill off the excess population as fast as possible. So what the globalist elite, the international bankers, are secretly doing is they have a whole array of strategies, radical strategies, that they're using to kill off the population as fast as possible. One is mass starvation, by deliberately creating food shortages which starve off millions and millions of people. Another strategy is limiting the water supply. And lack of water, which can be engineered secretly, will kill off hundreds of millions of people all over the world. It will dry up their crops, so they'll die from starvation because they will have no crops, because they have no water. And this is another secret agenda. The reason that the globalist elite are obsessed with abortions has nothing to do with women's rights. That's the propaganda. That's the mind control they use to get people to go along with the program. The globalist elite have no concern whatsoever about, quote, liberating women and a woman's choice, a woman's body. They could care less. But the masses, including the Hollywood types and stuff, they're scientifically dumbed down. They're in a brainwashed state of consciousness. They can't look at reality and see the obvious. The globalist elite, it's not even on their table to consider women's rights, despite what they tell the public what they want to hear, because they know the public is stupid and the public is going to believe them. One of the real reasons they created the women's rights movement, and make no mistake about it, if you read the history of the women's rights movement, you see the participation of the CIA in the creation of the women's liberation movement. Famous feminists like Gloria Steinem openly admits she was a CIA agent. And the game plan was to promote through the media this illusion that women should be free to be like superwomen, have exciting careers, they can be a mother if they want, they can have children if they want or don't want. And the ideal thing, the Rockefellers actually financed this through their Rockefeller Brothers Fund. I thought that this was so out there, was so nuts, that I said, this can't possibly be true. This is like such a conspiracy theory. It can't possibly be true. And I came across this information about 30 years ago. So what I always do as an author of 31 books is I always do my own independent research in every book I write. And that's why I uncover things you don't read about in most books, and definitely not in the mainstream media. But I just don't gullibly repeat every wacko theory that somebody gives me. And if it sounds too out there, or if it doesn't ring true, I'm not just going to regurgitate some crazy conspiracy theory unless I have credible documentation from impeccable sources. So when I heard about this plan of the Rockefeller Brothers Fund to portray and advertise and use brainwashing through television shows and television females that were role models and famous women on television, etc., as a means of changing women's consciousness, I thought that was way too conspiratorial. This is about 30 years ago. We didn't have the opportunity of having the internet back then. You had to research the old-fashioned way. There was no internet. There was no computers. You had to walk to a local library. You had to hope that the local library had enough books on different subjects. And then if a book or magazine article was too old or out of print, they would have everything on what's called microfiche. And microfiche looks like, have you ever held up like a chest x-ray in a hospital? It looks like an x-ray machine type thing. Not as hard, but it's like a plastic where they photograph the pages, and it's a very primitive technology. It's not really clear, but you can read the articles. Well, the Lord has always supernaturally guided my research. He's always opened doors. He's always given me hunches. He's always arranged what are not coincidences. He gives me divine help in my research. So the first library that I went to, I asked the librarian if they had a book written by the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, and it had a specific title and date, which I can't recall now. And she said, yes, we do. And I was shocked because this was a book that was actually published by the Rockefeller Brothers Fund themselves. And it was a report of their activities and the monies they spent and what the programs and agendas that they were financing. I couldn't believe I actually got my hands on their book printed by them, So I knew this was an accurate book because it would communicate what they really planned to do. And as I was reading and studying the book, and I incorporated the information in one of my earlier books a long time ago, Who Will Rule the Future? A Resistance to the New World Order. I was writing about this stuff. I was writing about the New World Order 35 years ago. Okay, and nobody knew what I was talking about. They looked at me like I was escaped a nut house. So I read the Rockefeller Brothers Fund book, and I read paragraph after paragraph of how the Rockefeller experts say that our plan is to promote an image of a new kind of woman, and we want to change a woman's identity in America. We want her morals to be different, her attitudes to be different, her beliefs to be different. We want women to be feminists. We don't want them to be biological mothers, because they held these beliefs, like excessive population growth is the major problem and other things. So as I'm reading, they're talking about the enormous millions and millions of dollars that they are going to spend raising up specific women in the entertainment industry as actresses, as screenplay writers, as directors, but especially actresses, and they're going to fund all kinds of movies, feature films, all kinds of television shows that promote the virtues and the benefits of a woman becoming a new kind of woman. And basically they were going to sell women on this new version of femininity. And the image was this: the new women that the Rockefeller Brothers Fund was creating was kind of a superwoman. She could do it all. But the primary thing they wanted to sell to the American consciousness was this new kind of woman was not a married wife. She was unmarried. The ideal woman had to be single. The new kind of woman, or the ideal woman, was sexually promiscuous, and this needed to be promoted as the new normal, the sexual promiscuity of the new woman. The new woman definitely did not wait to have sex within marriage. She was promiscuous. And the new woman was not interested in getting married. The new woman, the ideal woman, would have a relationship after a relationship, a series of relationships that did not involve marriage, that did not involve long-term commitment, and that did not involve her getting pregnant, giving birth to a baby, and being a mother. They really, in the Rockefeller Brothers Fund report, they really wanted to use advertising, television programs, media messages to really embed the idea into the consciousness of women that it's a bad thing to be married, it's a bad thing to be monogamous, it's a bad thing to get pregnant and to be a mother, and that you need to have a career first, you need to be sexually liberated, not tied down to one man, and if you happen to get pregnant, they wanted to promote the idea that the new kind of woman, when she first of all uses the pill, she uses birth control, okay? But if something goes wrong, they wanted to indoctrinate the American woman to believe that the smart woman, the successful woman, always gets an abortion. Okay, so they were promoting abortion because the woman that they were promoting was like the Cosmo girl, all about her needs. And the new kind of woman was never a mother, never got pregnant and gave birth to babies, and moved through a series of sexually intimate relationships, but never got married, and could have a full-time, high-powered career and an active social life. And I'm reading this, and this is their plan, and they're actually saying it, and the kinds of money they're going to spend. And then I begin to think of all the TV programs and movies where this very agenda, up until our very time period, it's still going on. And you come to the realization, it's like you stop being in that hypnotic state. You end the trance state now, and you see reality for what it is. The reality that we live in is all about programming and brainwashing the minds of the people to think what the globalist elite want us to believe, think, and do, without us being conscious of the fact that we are being brainwashed, just like Aldous Huxley said in The Scientific Dictatorship. That's what it's about. Now, I want to remind you of something. The average person has no clue that this is still happening today or that it happened then. No clue whatsoever. The average Christian, even to a higher percentage, is clueless. Theoretically, one would think those who call themselves Christians would be in prayer to God, would have the Holy Spirit or the Spirit of truth living inside them that would lead them into all truth. And that theoretically one would think that somebody who calls themselves a born-again Christian would be a lover of God's Word and study God's Word and learn how to apply God's Word to everyday reality. I mean, all you have to do is compare God's Word, God's ideal woman, with the Rockefeller Brothers Fund women. Read, for example, the Proverbs 31 woman. And don't be frightened of it. It'll set you free. The Proverbs 31 woman is on it. She's not a subservient little slave fetching her husband's slippers. The Proverbs 31 woman is a dynamic woman. Read the Bible for yourself. Quit allowing somebody to interpret it for you. If I was a woman, I would read Proverbs 31, but not through my religious sunglasses. I would read it like what God is really trying to say. The Proverbs 31 woman will set you free. She's not running around massaging her husband's back and slaving and toiling for her husband and just being a schlep. No, man, the Proverbs 31 woman will set you free. She's dynamic. She's intelligent. She's sharp. She presents herself well. She talks to the leaders, of her society, and they respect her. She dresses attractively and in taste. She doesn't dress like a slut. She dresses in a way that makes her physically attractive, but also in a way that earns people's respect. They don't objectify her. And she's a businesswoman. So not only is she a mother, not only is she a wife, but she's a mother and a wife who runs a business. So she's got it all going on. So God's perspective of women and the dynamic, vibrant identities and roles they should have in life in the book of Proverbs was written thousands and thousands of years ago in ancient Israel. And yet it portrayed a liberated woman in the good sense of the word thousands and thousands of years before the whole feminist movement came along. And the historical fact is that the Bible and true Christianity was the most powerful force in liberating women than any other force in human history. And to say that the Bible has oppressed women and the Bible is responsible for oppressing women is total nonsense. Many religions oppress women. Yeah, many religions and many secular humanist groups oppress women. I'm not going to name the name of a specific religion, but there is a religion, but it's not the only religion that oppresses women. But when you force a woman to have a surgical procedure, and I'm going to be very delicate about this, when you force a woman to have a surgical procedure on the most intimate parts of a female's anatomy, which destroys her ability to experience pleasure in a physical act of intimacy with her husband within a marriage. How sick, how barbaric, how cruel is that? Talk about the oppression and subjugation of women. I mean, that's psychopathic. And there's other things that are done by all kinds of groups that oppress women. So the Bible liberated women a long time ago. And so the key is this globalist elite, the reason, there's always a reason behind why they promoted this, the Rockefeller Brothers Fund promoted this vision of a woman. The reason is that the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, the globalist elite, the international banking families, the puppet masters who control the puppets, the shadow government, or whatever you want to call them, the scientific dictatorship, the people that are really running our country and our world and our culture, use scientific psychological manipulation and brainwashing. And the reason they want to promote a new vision of a woman as not being married, as not being a mother, as not producing children, okay, is because the globalist elite control the masses of the world primarily through science, technology, scientific mind control, brainwashing, what are known as trance states, programming people, and indoctrination. You may think that's heavy. If you think it's heavy, I want to encourage you, get a copy of my book, Conquering the Matrix. Conquering the Matrix explains scientific mind control, which is not a conspiracy theory. It's an advanced reality that is very, very much exploding today. Conquering the Matrix, available at paulmcguire.us, explains scientific mind control, indoctrination, propaganda, hypnotic states, programming in simple, fast-moving terms. You will know instantly when you begin to read Conquering the Matrix whether or not you have been programmed, hypnotized, or are under the influence of scientific mind control or indoctrination. It is critical that you know whether or not if you are under some kind of psychological influence, because that means you're not thinking from your own free will. It's important if you know that somebody is using scientific mind control against you without your knowledge, that you recognize the signs of it. Or if you're a mother or a father, that you recognize if one of your children or grandchildren or a friend or a loved one or someone you know or your husband or wife is being influenced secretly by scientific mind control or persuasion or hypnotic techniques. You see, I can look at a person for the most part, and within seconds, I can tell you if they have been through some kind of heavy-duty mind control program. Now, to the ordinary person, these people look very ordinary and very, very real. I'm not talking about I recognize them because they look crazy. No. People under mind control don't look crazy for the most part. They look very sane. But when somebody has been through mind control like MK Ultra, they leave signatures in their personality, mannerisms, eyes, vocal tones, the way they speak. If you have a trained eye, you can recognize that they've been programmed instantly. And I can teach you in Conquering the Matrix how to develop that trained eye. There was a woman who appeared during the Judge Kavanaugh trial. Okay, who said that she had a repressed memory of Kavanaugh and one of his high school buddies in the process of sexually molesting her, but they never ended up sexually molesting her, but they started the process. Her story is somewhat scrambled, but supposedly it was in 2012 was the first time she said where this memory of abuse resurfaced. And she concealed the fact very carefully that the manner in which this memory resurfaced was that she participated in a hypnotic therapy process where they use hypnosis to retrieve important memories that have been suppressed by things like trauma. So if something's buried deep in someone's subconscious, they may not even remember that it happened. But under forms of hypnotic therapy, you can cause a person to open up their subconscious mind and resurface the trauma, which supposedly this happened in 2012 when the memory of the alleged abuse by Kavanaugh resurfaced. Now, but weirdly, that was the only memory that resurfaced because she couldn't remember where she was, when she came from, all these particulars she couldn't remember. Now, people who are victims of trauma often react that way. They suppress it. They don't have complete memories. And, this is not something that I'm indifferent towards or callous about. As a professor teaching at a very famous Christian university and seminary, I was a professor of eschatology, which is Bible prophecy. But as a professor, I also taught for years a series of courses called emotional healing. But I would use the Bible and the Holy Spirit as my primary tools. And I cannot tell you the amount of people, both men and women, who would come up to me privately during these classes because the Holy Spirit would resurface trauma that was never dealt with. And I can't tell you the number of men and women who came up to me and with sobbing and tears in their eyes were remembering everything from being molested and raped in the crib to being both boys and girls being molested as young infants, young children, teenage girls, young adults. It's a huge percentage of our society. And I had a reputation for believing and accepting these people. I didn't reject them. I didn't assume that they were lying. Now, I didn't do that because I'm naive. I didn't do that because I'm gullible. But I have a high level of perception, and which is a gift from God, and I have a very strong sense when I'm talking to people about whether or not what they're telling me is true or they've made it up. And I will always pray over people who confide in me about something. I never break their sacred trust and confidence, but I'll pray for them. And there's times, it's the minority. It's a very small minority. 97% of the people who come to me are telling the truth, but you get about 3%. And I don't think they're lying. I don't know what happened, but there are occasionally times people have said, I need prayer for whatever. And I pray, and I believe God ministers to them. And I don't shame people, but I sense that what they're sharing with me, there's something wrong with their story. It's either not entirely true or there's other elements. It just does not ring true. Okay, now I'm not the judge of people's hearts, so I still give them the benefit of the doubt. And because of the reputation I had of accepting people, and many of the people were very wounded because they would tell a religious leader or a pastor or a Christian friend, and people would basically deny what happened to them or make fun of them. So I'm very sensitive and aware how serious a problem this is. When I looked at Dr. Christine Blasey Ford, I knew instantly certain things about her life and certain programs that she has been through in her life because the signatures were there. Then I did research about who she was. And it turns out that not only were these traumatic memories resurfaced from her through hypnosis, but she is one of the most renowned professionals who teaches at Stanford University Medical School, Palo Alto, prestigious universities and colleges. She teaches regular programs, is a prolific scientific researcher who has published countless scientific journals and reports that involve the usage of hypnosis to retrieve important suppressed memories, using hypnosis to implant artificial memories, and using yoga techniques, meditation techniques, and techniques that achieve altered states of consciousness to bring about suppressed memories or implant artificial memories in people, which, by the way, that's a form of mind control. Okay, so she's not just a patient type, she's one of the foremost experts. And contrary to the personality that she showed on television, which I believe was largely an act, and I'll say why. In real life, she came off as this fragile bird personality with the greasy hair, the thick glasses that were unusually thick. She came off like she was trying to be an actress portraying a victim of horrific abuse. She was portraying the victim. I'm not making fun of her. And then she spoke with this childlike voice that emanated from her throat, which was very odd. But then she had all these eccentricities, which I think were manufactured. Like she said, "May I have some caffeine, please?" That's a very odd statement. And then she starts to babble about serotonin and different neurological chemicals to kind of like let us know that she's smart in that area. But something was really wrong with her whole gig. And so when I did research on her, I discovered that the real pictures of Dr. Christine Blasey Ford, she's dressed powerfully, professionally. Her hair is clean and sharp, not greasy. She's not wearing thick, weird glasses. In other words, what she looks and acts like in real life is a very sharp, very sane, powerful individual, not the lady we saw at the hearings. And then when you read the comments that her students made about her in her classes from these prestigious universities, they say things like she's one of the worst professors I've ever had, that she's cruel, that she's indifferent, and in a number of reviews about her, she like abused the students by treating them like slaves and with total disrespect. So the Christine Blasey that you saw, the illusory Christine Blasey, is not the real Christine Blasey. Now, added to that, there are, her father worked for the CIA. Some say that she's currently involved in CIA programs, mind control programs. And then there are allegations that her grandfather worked for the CIA. And there are allegations that there was a connection between her grandfather and father, that they were involved in financing mind control programs for the CIA at Stanford Research Institute. And it should be remembered that in the 50s and the 60s, Stanford Research Institute was one of the centers of CIA mind control programs, including the promotion and usage of LSD for mind control. So whether or not she definitely comes from a CIA family background. She herself potentially could be in the CIA in the area of mind control. And it's kind of ambiguous because it's concealed. It appears that it is factual that her father and grandfather worked for the CIA. It's not clear if they worked for the mind control program or financed mind control programs. that would require deeper research. But the bottom line is she's not the victim she pretended to be. And her primary reason for testifying wasn't to free herself from the chains of and shame of psychological abuse. It's clear from all her social media, which was magically scrubbed off the internet before she testified. It's clear that from the emails and conversations that were discovered that she passionately hated President Donald Trump and passionately wanted to see him removed from office. Now the question is, regarding Dr. Christine Blasey Ford, was she acting independently, acting on her own feelings and beliefs, and just happens to be potentially connected with the CIA, but definitely a mind control researcher? Absolutely. Or the question at least needs to be raised and investigated. Was this entire thing where she accuses Kavanaugh as being molesting her, was that a deep state operation? I don't know if it was or not, but in light of the fact that so many people in the intelligence agencies and the FBI and other intelligence agencies are caught saying they're going to wear wires around Trump to bust him and then pretend that it's a joke to try to get out of it. Well, maybe it was a joke. But you see, the percentage of unusual circumstances, the enormous frequency in which these questionable activities and statements being made by highest level FBI directors and highest level people in the CIA and the FBI, there's a peculiar phenomenon, and that is there's a very high degree of statements that suggest, well, some of the statements are brutally clear, like Robert Mueller's statements by email, and all the people Mueller communicated to. They came out and said that they were going to do everything possible to destroy Trump from getting elected. And then they said, and in the case he does get elected, we have an insurance policy, which is this fabricated Russian collusion story that was financed by the Democratic National Committee and Hillary Clinton. So there's just too many unusual circumstances. Too many unusual circumstances. So what does this all have to do with the two paths in the two directions? This. The path that comes from a secular humanist evolutionary worldview, which is ultimately guided, shaped, and led and financed by a secretive globalist elite, moves us in further into a society in which the people and the elite reject the God of the Bible. They reject the laws and commandments of the God of the Bible. They reject his precepts. They reject his plan for mankind. And they substitute it with a counterfeit God. And the counterfeit God for humanists is an all-powerful big brother government that uses scientific mind control, an all-powerful bureaucratic state, a top-down, like the pyramid, centralized authority of bureaucrats which micromanage all aspects of people's lives. Because you see, when a society is composed of people that no longer believe in God, then of course they no longer believe that God is their source, that God is their supply for everything they need. Now God may use government, and God often does use government to be the physical entity to meet people's needs, but ultimately it's channeled through God. But when you have a society which does not acknowledge God and puts government up in the place of God, then the society, even on a subtle level, begins to worship begins to worship government as God, and then they begin to worship political leaders as God or the Messiah. And because they're humanists and they don't believe in the real God, so they have to have something, so they make man God or man's institutions. In every single society historically where God is replaced by government or a dictator like Adolf Hitler or whatever, in every situation where they worship a dictator as the Messiah or a political leader as God, or the government as God, those are ideas and concepts that always, 100% of the time, produce the worst outcomes for ordinary men and women. Without exception, if you look at the historical model, which young people are not allowed to today, young adults are not allowed to, they hide that from people. The media hides that from people. If you look at the historical models, you discover with mathematical certainty that every nation that begins to worship a political leader as the Messiah and government as God, the next phase is the society undergoes a revolution driven by the dictator who's rising to power, who strategically exploits the weaknesses, the fears, the prejudices of the people, who methodically and strategically throws that society or nation into a state of chaos. Why? Because the occult slogan, the occult mantra of occultic Freemasonry and Illuminati thinking, their motto is the word order out of chaos. And the symbol below the words order out of chaos from Latin is the red picture of the phoenix bird. And the phoenix bird is the legendary bird that represents the New World Order. And the legend of the phoenix is one in which the phoenix is burned up into ashes, and then the phoenix being burned up into ashes represents the old order, or the old world order, being destroyed and burnt up into ashes. And then the phoenix goes through a counterfeit resurrection in which the phoenix comes back to life as the new world order. So the old order must die through chaos, and the new world order is birthed as the phoenix, and that's supposed to be paradise on earth. But it's Luciferian and occultic. And that's the important thing, because the Illuminati is Luciferian and occultic. So the expression order out of chaos, when that same revolutionary principle is applied in our contemporary time, they have simply called it manufactured crisis or crisis. So radicals in our society today and billionaires who finance radical activists are employing the Saul Alinsky technique, who was the community organizer and socialist radical who believed, along with other radicals, that they needed to create a manufactured crisis continually, because manufactured crisis would do the same thing as chaos, and manufactured crisis would lead to the total destruction of the old Christian, Judeo-Christian, capitalist, Constitution, Bill of Rights order, and replace it with a new order known as the New World Order. And this New World Order would be built upon not the God of the Bible, but built upon the principles of the Illuminati, the principles of Satanism, and the principles of humanism. Now, how this ties together is this. That's where we are right now with America. The next few days, the next few weeks, we will be making choices, we will be making votes. We should be praying with everything in us because we are being warned that this is the final battle and therefore this is the final warning. What happens now will be irreversible because once you create an environment where it's impossible to pass laws and legislation to keep our Constitution, our American way of life, and our freedoms, you go into a free fall that moves into totalitarianism. And then you will have a dictatorship. And the way it's done, and if you look on television and the television images, just look carefully and notice that all the chaos, all the manufactured crisis that you're seeing on television via television news and other instruments of communication, notice that it's all built on chaos. It's all built on manufactured crisis because the purpose of chaos, the purpose of manufactured crisis is to destroy the old order, which is the Christian biblical order, and replace it with the New World Order. What is the New World Order? The New World Order, according to the globalists like Henry Kissinger, like Brzezinski, like Rockefeller, and many, many others, the New World Order is a global government, a global religion, and a global economic system based on humanism, which will absolutely become a global totalitarian dictatorship in which mankind will lose all of their freedoms and serve the globalist elite as slaves. That's the real purpose of the New World Order. So, chaos, it's out of chaos, the destruction of the old order, that the New World Order will come into being. In the same way, it's out of crisis, manufactured crisis, that the old order will become the New World Order. Okay? And crisis is both the spiritual satanic force that is harnessed to create this New World Order, and crisis or chaos is also the psychological weapon, the psychological organizing principle. Crisis is the strategic methodology by which a nation, a Christian nation and a free nation like America, can be destroyed and replaced by a totalitarian regime with lots of flowery promises of heaven on earth. So, if you review carefully the news footage, what do you see? You see riots. You see race wars, racial divisions in cities across America. You see liberals who once were very tolerant. Liberals who at one time, when I was young, and when I was a radical activist from the left, liberals were the ones that were the champions of free speech. And they wanted to guarantee free speech whether they agreed with you or not. They believed in free speech. And we were told when I was young, many of you remember this, over and over again, that it would be the Christian right, that it would be conservatives that would censor all the books, censor all the movies, censor everything. And it would be conservatives and Christians who would be responsible for the death of free speech and freedom of the press and freedom of religion. Because the liberals back then, in the 60s and the 70s, they were tolerant in the good sense of the word. They were civil. They believed in freedom of speech and freedom of the press. And even though they didn't agree with you, they would defend to the death your right to say it. But decades have gone by, and the complete opposite has happened. We see that the sociological force that is become fascist, that has become dictatorial, that is about censorship, it's about political correctness, it's about hate speech, all means of censorship, all means are mechanisms of destroying free speech, destroying freedom of religion, destroying freedom of the press, destroying freedom of the right to bear arms, destroying the freedom of assembly, and on and on and on. Our Constitution, among all the other governmental documents in the world, and the Bill of Rights says that the Creator, capital C, the biblical God, has given us certain inalienable rights such as life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's unique to America. That's why we have an American dream. And we're given freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press. But who is it that is militantly functioning as fascists, functioning like Nazis, functioning like stormtroopers, functioning like madmen and women, communist revolutionaries, trying to establish a dictatorship? Who is it? It's not the conservatives. It's not the Christians. It's this new breed of leftists that are 180 degrees different than the leftists of the 1960s and the 1970s. They want to censor any dissenting opinion or voice, and they will use violence, just like the Nazis did. They will use intimidation, like the Nazis did. They will use the media to patrol people and attack people. They have built ideological alliances with the big tech companies, the computer companies, the social media companies, the search engine companies. They've built alliances and they work synergistically with the mainstream media, television, newspapers, etc. And the radicalized left are being financed, by the way, by super capitalists like George Soros. And then they stage all these crisis events, like today it's 9,000. Who knows what it'll be in a couple of days. 9,000 people coming in from Guatemala and South American countries, all carefully coordinated to start arriving, to start gaining enormous media coverage right before the most important election. So it's not an accident that all of a sudden these migrants are coming from Guatemala and it's grabbing all the media attention. And it's all carefully timed, strategically timed to put it on camera right before the election. But look at all the trucks driving right next to the people marching in line. Look at all the trailers driving next to the people marching in line. Look at all the like organizers in like these yellow construction outfits and baseball caps and earpieces and cell phones who are organizing everything. Look at the higher level organizers, which are white and college educated. They look like feminists or radical leftist men who could be 40, 50, 60 years old. They're professional psychologically trained, professional propagandists, professional agitators, professional people that can create riots and grab media attention. The billionaire pays for this underground industry of some of the most sophisticated advertising, propaganda, marketing people in the world who stage these events like theatrical events where you put all the young children up front to break the heart of the television viewer, where you put the mothers with their newborn babies desperately trying to come to the United States. Now, obviously, that's going to pull on the heartstrings of any normal, compassionate person. If you're seeing young babies being held by their mothers, coming for a better life, I mean, your heart goes out. You have compassion and love. When you see the young children and the potential of them being separated from their families, you feel tremendous compassion and love. And you're being manipulated because when you look further down the line, all of a sudden it's not children and it's not mothers with babies. It's full-grown males of military age, somewhere around the age of 23 years old. That's the majority of the people coming. And they look aggressive, physically strong. And then you notice all these support vehicles supplying water, supplying bathrooms, supplying food, supplying medical attention. That this so-called spontaneous march from Guatemala is highly organized as a military invasion. That somebody has spent countless millions of dollars with professional agitators, organizers, networkers, making sure the media is there. That this is a highly planned political operation for the benefit of the television camera to sway the election. That's what this is all about, you see. That's brainwashing. That's mind control, because they're manipulating the American people by selecting only those images, those sound bites, and those video segments which support the propaganda or lie narrative. And the propaganda and lie narrative is that these are mostly people like mothers with young children with their fathers and mothers, and people who are trained in a job. They're not here to take from our society, but to contribute. And that is a seriously distorted picture of what's really happening. What's really happening is these people are being used as pawns to ensure a socialist government. What's really happening is that many of these people coming across the border are connected with the cartels, the drug cartels, the human trafficking cartels, drugs, people looking with criminal records and stuff. That's the real picture of reality. But they distort the real picture of reality and turn it into kind of a religious crusade where they parade people that any person with a normal conscience, your heart would go out to seeing children and mothers with babies. So your emotions are being manipulated. Why are they going through Mexico? Why is it the United States' problem? Why isn't Mexico taking care of them? Why isn't Mexico assimilating them into their economy? Why does Mexico become nothing more than a conduit to move them from South America through Mexico into the United States? Why? Because what will happen, and these are people from all nations and many races. There's Chinese people, there's people from the Middle East, there's people from South America, Mexico, all over the world coming through. But the vast majority of them are coming for the benefits that our government will give them for free, which means paying for college educations, paying for medical care, paying for all kinds of things. They'll get Social Security. Now, we believe in love. Of course we do. But is it fair that an American woman, whether she's white, Hispanic, African American, they have worked their entire lives, 30, 40 years, and men working 30 to 40 years in jobs, showing up every day, whether they liked it or not. They've paid into the system. They've earned their Social Security. And yet, when it's time to get their medical care and their Social Security or scholarships for their children and the other benefits that they worked for 30 or 40 years as American citizens, is it fair to deliberately allow people in through our borders who now get to scoop up all the benefits of Social Security, Medicare, medical care, free scholarships, free education, all these government benefits? Is it fair to give it to people who just came the other day or in the last year or two and treat them the same as if they've been here for 40 years working like slaves? You got hundreds of millions of American citizens, working class, middle class, toiling in some pretty crummy jobs for decades, paying their Social Security, not getting all these benefits. Now, another group of people come in and they get the big time scholarships, all the benefits. Is that fair? No, it's not fair. You know what that is? That's socialism. That's redistributing the wealth. And there are certain politicians in the United States and certain billionaires in the United States who are using these people as pawns because they know that these people, they know of all these free benefits they're going to get. I mean, let's be honest, any one of us would come across the border too to get these free benefits. We're not any more noble than they are. But you see, they're being used as pawns because they are coming here to fully support socialist politics, a socialist government, because they're dependent upon it. That's their mindset. They're going to get all this free stuff. So, of course, they're socialists. So what does that do? That guarantees votes and support for one particular political party that is socialist. That's what it does. They will have forever voters among people who are getting benefits. So what they've done is this political party has, I believe, circumvented the political process and literally bought votes by spending the taxpayers' money to buy votes. That's what this is all about. This is simply about bringing in people to large scale shatter the American system and shatter the common American cultural identity, which includes African Americans, it includes Hispanics who's been here a number of generations. And notice this, that the television, the news footage, the media coverage by the mainstream media of all these migrants coming across the border in these large lines, it's like a mirror copy of what the globalist elite are doing in Europe, where you see the same video footage. You see these thousands of people coming through Turkey, coming from Syria into the European Union by the thousands and thousands, just like what's happening on our borders. And why is it happening? Because the same secretive globalist elite that are behind the invasion of migrants into Europe are the same globalist elite that are behind the invasion of migrants going through Mexico into the United States. It's the same game plan to destroy the sovereign nations so you can have a socialist nation. Now, what does this mean? It means that globalist elite have continually said, these super billionaires have continually said that they view President Donald Trump as the single most greatest threat to their globalist plan for a new world order. Repeatedly, the biggest leaders in the globalist elite movement, the international bankers, have said over and over again, Donald Trump represents the single most greatest threat to our globalist plans. And what is the final part of the globalist plan? Is that it's a lie. It's smoke and mirrors that the middle class and the working class make more money and have a better lifestyle. That's a lie. The reality is the money flows out of the pockets of the working middle class and lower class in America, and it flows into the hands of the globalist elite. And that's the dirty secret that's behind the New World Order. Okay, you need to understand this, and you need to do everything you can to educate your friends, your children, because knowledge is power. People become slaves when they don't know what's going on. And the only way you can continue to be a free human being, the only way that you will continue to have the freedom to worship the Lord Jesus Christ, to read your Bibles, to preach the gospel, the only way that will continue is if we have politicians in office who will support our Bill of Rights and our Constitution, which means we vote for, we pray for, and we support politicians that want to protect our freedom of speech, our freedom of religion, our freedom of the press. That's right, because there are a large number of politicians who are very deceptive. They secretly want to destroy our Constitution and Bill of Rights. But they don't come out and say, we're going to destroy the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. They use words of trickery, like Al Gore says, I believe the Constitution is an evolving document. Well, what does that mean? An evolving document is an evolving contract. It means, first of all, it's a lie. The whole point of our Founding Fathers' Constitution and Bill of Rights is it was supposed to be a constant protection of the freedoms of we the people, to protect us from tyranny. It was never supposed to be evolving. That's a word of trickery. When you say the Constitution's an evolving document, what you're really saying is, I want to change the wording of the Constitution. I want to remove sections of it. I want to change it. I want to modify it. I want to rewrite it. That's what they mean by evolving document. It means they really want to get their hands on it and tamper with it. Why? Because the globalist elite that truly controls America through a shadow government and a deep state is all about, they need to destroy the Constitution and the Bill of Rights because that is the legal protection which protects us as we the people. Those freedoms are important for our survival. Notice that the globalist elite, the Al Gores and others in the world, want to get in there and they want to remove freedom of the speech. They want, they're doing it already. They simply call what you and I know to be freedom of speech through trickery, once again, they call it hate speech. And by calling it hate speech, their goal is to remove our freedom of speech by falsely labeling it as hate speech. That's this evolving document trickery. When we want to have freedom of religion, their goal very soon is to censor all Christian words, Bible verses, evangelism, because they're going to call it hate speech, you see. And they're going to say, well, that's not a religion, that's hate speech. And so we're going to make it illegal for you to share Bible verses, pray for people, quote scriptures, practice your Christianity, preach the gospel. It will be illegal because they will designate it as hate speech. That's trickery. And then you have so many other things. Freedom of the press. That means you're supposed to be able to have the right to use the media to speak the truth or communicate the religion that you believe in, communicate the ideas that you believe in. But they have, by using the trickery of an evolving document, they're taking away all of our freedom of speech, all of our freedom of the press, and all of our freedom of religion. Just look how it's being done. The mainstream media, anything that they consider hate speech, which is just about anything that doesn't go along with the Marxist cause, is called hate speech. So it's censored off television. It's censored out of the mainstream media. When people want to use their social media, their Facebook accounts, or the search engines like Google or YouTube or Twitter or all these other social media companies, the whole internet, the social media companies are now rigging everything. So they censor, they delete, they remove anything that promotes the Christian religion, conservative thought, family values, anything that disagrees with their communist socialist system. They censor. There are thousands and thousands of people, ordinary people, whose websites, whose Facebooks are being removed overnight. Okay, that's censorship. That's what they do in a totalitarian dictatorship. America is supposed to have freedom of the press, freedom of religion, and freedom of speech. Now, if the people that love those freedoms will not stand up and vote and pray and seek the Lord, then the people deserve to have their freedoms stolen from them. Because if a people like Christians in America, evangelical Christians in America, will just sit there and passively do nothing while the enemies of the gospel of Jesus Christ come into our society and steal and make it illegal to communicate our Christianity, our biblical truth, our values on the internet, social media, the mainstream media, and the Christians just do nothing but look at it and are apathetic, well, God isn't going to overrule the will of the Christians. God's willing to intervene, but he expects his people to be responsible. Jesus Christ said the words, "Occupy until I come." So this is a critical time. Now, the key thing is to be intelligent, to be wise. I strongly encourage you to get yourself a copy of the book Trumpocalypse. Trumpocalypse, the End Times President, a battle against the globalist elite, and the countdown to Armageddon. Trumpocalypse is the best-selling prophecy book in the world right now. And I wrote it with my co-author, Troy Anderson. We also wrote the Babylon Code together. And Trumpocalypse answers all the questions that you might have regarding Trump. Like how can we support a president who appears to have moral actions that are in contradiction to the Bible? How can we support a president who does this and that? And then people have legitimate questions. And then, who really is the deep state? Well, we go into the history of the deep state. Who is the Illuminati? Do the Illuminati really have an influence on the presidency and our government? We go into detail about this. And this is heavily researched. It's a fast-moving book. It changes the lives of people who have read it. This book has been read, by the way, Trumpocalypse, by the people at the highest level of the United States of America. And I'll leave it at that. At the very highest level, they're reading Trumpocalypse. There are numerous pages of exhaustive footnotes which document all the sources, all the interviews, because the interviews, the sources we use are credible, trustworthy sources. And so we deal with the plot to assassinate Trump. I had the privilege of interviewing somebody privately via phone who shared with me information that's bone-chilling, and it's in the book Trumpocalypse. We interviewed high-level, respected members of the left, intellectuals from the left, like Dr. Noam Chomsky of MIT, a brilliant man. Now, he's a liberal and a member of the left that doesn't believe in censorship. He believes in free speech. So we wanted to hear what he had to say. He granted us an interview, Noam Chomsky, prominent leader on the left, and other prominent leaders on the left. Troy interviewed Dr. Billy Graham, and perhaps his last statement on America and Bible prophecy. It's an historical interview that's only in the book Trumpocalypse. People in Washington, we talk about who the deep state really is, the invisible government, things like the scientific brainwashing technique called emotional contagion, where you can spread rage and anger through the mainstream media, through music, and through social media. And then ask yourself the question, why are huge segments of our society, why are people so angry? We've never seen this before. Why are they going berserk? Why are they in a psychotic rage? It's because people are pulling them like puppets. They're pulling their puppet strings through psychological manipulation that's designed to make them go berserk with rage. And the actual technology is called emotional contagion. We also talk about the New World Order and how the New World Order collides into Donald Trump. Also, Donald Trump, his families, they were high-level Scottish Freemasonry. We talk about the occult behind the International Monetary Fund, the Illuminati, the super EMP threat. We talk about China, the new economy. You need to get yourself a copy of Trumpocalypse right away. Know what you're talking about, because people are going to challenge you, they're going to debate with you, they're going to press your buttons. And if you don't know what you're talking about, you really are an embarrassment for the kingdom of God. Because if all you can do is stutter, nobody's going to respect you. If you bothered to educate yourself and not just stare at liberal network television programming like a crash test dummy that hit a wall, people aren't going to respect you. Your family members, people at work and stuff, they're not going to respect you if you don't know what you're talking about. Many prominent Christian leaders have personally read, and they powerfully endorse Trumpocalypse. Get yourself a copy. I'm Paul McGuire. Visit paulmcguire.us. We have tons of free videos, tons of the archives of the Paul McGuire Report on different topics. We have hundreds of pages of free articles with photographs. We have our television channel, the Roku Channel, called Paul McGuire Ministries. And of course, we have regular Paradise Mountain church meetings. And we have one coming up right away. So you need to go to paulmcguire.us, that's paulmcguire.us, to join us there. And the meeting, of course, is free. Parking is free, but you must pre-register, and that's right around the corner. God bless you. I'm Paul McGuire. Never give up hope. Never retreat. Never surrender. God said, occupy the land until I come. So let's go about and do our Father's business and occupy the land until He comes. That's our divine assignment. And you won't find fulfillment in life or peace of mind until you're busy about your Father's business. You see, if you're goofing off and you're not doing what your Heavenly Father commanded you to do, then you're going to have anxiety and depression and all these ailments and dissatisfaction. You won't have the blessing of God because God doesn't bless the disobedient. But if you're willing to line up with God's will for your life, you'll discover it's the most awesome, fantastic thing a person can experience. So God bless you. I'm Paul McGuire. Visit paulmcguire.us. That's paulmcguire.us. And when you join us at a Paradise Mountain Church meeting or other events coming up, remember it's a thrill and a joy to meet you personally. And when people come to those meetings, and if you need prayer, it's always my commitment, always. I will personally pray for you and minister to you, and it's my privilege as a servant, and I mean that, as a servant of Jesus Christ, to do that.